Satellites just revealed something terrifying in the South China Sea. Between October 2024 and January 2025, China built three new military installations on artificial islands 800 miles from their mainland. These aren't just bases, they're missile fortresses designed to sink American aircraft carriers before they can get within 500 miles of Taiwan. And the construction happened so fast that U.S. intelligence didn't detect it until it was already operational. The images released last week show hardened bunkers, radar installations, and underground missile storage facilities on islands that didn't exist 5 years ago. China turned coral reefs into unsinkable aircraft carriers, and they're positioning weapons that can reach every U.S. base in the Western Pacific. Here's what the satellite images reveal: why this changes the military balance in Asia, and why Taiwan might have less than 18 months before China feels confident enough to invade. The Spratly Islands used to be uninhabited rocks and reefs scattered across 160,000 square miles of ocean. Between 2014 and 2020, China dredged sand from the seafloor and built 7 artificial islands on top of them. They claimed these were for civilian purposes: maritime research, weather monitoring, search and rescue operations. That was a lie. The new satellite images show what China actually built. Subi Reef now has a 10,000-foot runway capable of handling heavy bombers and tanker aircraft. Mischief Reef has underground hangar facilities that can shelter 24 fighter aircraft from missile strikes. Fiery Cross Reef has radar installations with 500-mile detection range covering approaches to the Philippines and Vietnam. These aren't research stations. These are military bases positioned to control the South China Sea. But here's what the latest images reveal that changes everything. Between October 2024 and January 2025, China installed what appear to be YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile launchers on all 3 islands. These missiles travel at Mach 10, can maneuver during flight to evade defenses, and have a range of 900 miles. A U.S. aircraft carrier strike group approaching Taiwan would be within range of these missiles before it could launch aircraft. The math becomes impossible for the U.S. Navy. An aircraft carrier needs to get within 400 miles of Taiwan to effectively support an invasion defense. But Chinese missiles can engage carriers at 900 miles. The carrier would be under attack for 500 miles before it could contribute to the battle. And hypersonic missiles traveling at Mach 10 give Aegis defense systems about 90 seconds of warning before impact. That's not enough time. The most disturbing details in the satellite images aren't what's visible on the surface. It's what's underneath. All 3 major installations show evidence of extensive underground construction: tunnel entrances, ventilation shafts, reinforced concrete bunkers built to survive conventional missile strikes. Commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs shows the construction timeline. October 2024 shows normal island infrastructure with no unusual activity. November 2024 shows heavy construction equipment appearing on all 3 islands simultaneously. December 2024 shows tunnel entrances being excavated and concrete being poured. January 2025 shows the tunnels sealed and camouflaged with the construction equipment already removed. This is the pattern of hardened military facilities. You don't build underground bunkers for weather stations. You build them to protect missiles, ammunition, and personnel from airstrikes. China is preparing these islands to survive American cruise missile attacks and continue operating. They're creating fortresses that can't be neutralized quickly. But here's what military analysts find most concerning. The speed of construction suggests China had all the materials pre-positioned and was just waiting for the right moment to install them. They didn't start from scratch in October. They had everything ready and executed installation in 3 months. That level of preparation indicates this was planned years in advance and hidden until they were ready to reveal it. The YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile is the weapon China designed specifically to kill American aircraft carriers. It's launched from ground installations, ships, or aircraft, accelerates to Mach 10, and maneuvers unpredictably during its terminal phase. Current U.S. missile defense systems have a theoretical capability to intercept hypersonic missiles. Theoretical doesn't mean it works reliably in combat. Here's the problem with defending against hypersonic missiles. Traditional anti-ship missiles fly at Mach 2 to Mach 3 and follow ballistic trajectories. Aegis radar can track them from 200 miles away and shoot them down with SM-6 interceptors. Hypersonic missiles fly at Mach 10 and maneuver. By the time Aegis detects them at 100 miles, they're 60 seconds from impact. You get 1 or 2 intercept attempts. If those miss, the carrier is hit. The math is brutal. A carrier strike group has about 90 vertical launch cells loaded with SM-6 missiles. China can launch hundreds of YJ-21 SAVE from ground installations, ships, and aircraft simultaneously. The carrier group runs out of interceptors before China runs out of missiles. Even if interception rates are 90% successful, the 10% that get through will mission kill or sink the carrier. But here's what the satellite images show. The underground facilities on the Spratly Islands can store an estimated 200 to 300 missiles total across all 3 installations. That's enough to overwhelm multiple carrier strike groups simultaneously. China isn't building capacity to deter American carriers. They're building capacity to sink them. The 3 islands form a triangle that covers the entire southern approach to Taiwan and the Philippines. Each island has multiple radar installations: synthetic aperture radar for detecting ships, air search radar for tracking aircraft, fire control radar for guiding missiles. Together, they create overlapping coverage that makes it nearly impossible for U.S. forces to approach undetected. The radar positioning is strategic. Fury Cross Reef covers approaches from the south. Subi Reef covers approaches from the southwest. Mischief Reef covers approaches from the southeast. Any U.S. carrier group approaching Taiwan from the Pacific has to pass through the detection envelope of at least one of these installations. But here's what makes it worse. These radars aren't operating in isolation. They're networked with Chinese satellites, long-range patrol aircraft, and underwater sensors. China is building an integrated air defense system that spans thousands of miles. The South China Sea Islands are nodes in a network designed to detect, track, and target American forces from the moment they leave port. The intelligence advantage this creates is massive. China will know where every U.S. carrier is at all times. They can track movements, predict routes, and position submarines and missile launchers before U.S. ships arrive in the area. American forces lose the element of surprise. Every approach is contested. Building military bases on artificial islands in disputed waters violates the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. A 2016 international tribunal ruled that China's claims to the South China Sea had no legal basis. China ignored the ruling completely and continued construction. The international community condemned China's actions. China didn't care. Here's the brutal reality of international law. It only matters if someone can enforce it. The U.S. Navy could theoretically sail within 12 miles of these islands to assert freedom of navigation. They do this occasionally. China shadows them with warships and aircraft. Both sides posture. Nothing changes. China keeps building. But here's what changed in the last 3 months. The new missile installations make freedom of navigation operations exponentially more dangerous. Before, the risk was a standoff or collision. Now the risk is that China decides to enforce its claimed territorial waters with lethal force. A U.S. destroyer sailing within 12 miles of Subi Reef is now within range of shore-based anti-ship missiles. One mistake, one miscalculation, and you have a shooting war. The Philippines has claims to some of these islands. Vietnam has claims to others. Neither country has the military capability to challenge China. The Philippines relies on a mutual defense treaty with the United States. But would the U.S. risk war with China over rocks in the South China Sea? China is betting the answer is no. So they keep building. Every analysis of a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan includes the question of U.S. carrier strike groups. Can they arrive in time? Can they survive long enough to make a difference? The new missile installations on the Spratly Islands changed the calculus dramatically. Here's the previous assessment. If China invaded Taiwan, the U.S. would surge 3 to 4 carrier strike groups to the region within 72 to 96 hours. Those carriers would launch hundreds of aircraft to achieve air superiority, destroy Chinese landing ships, and support Taiwanese forces. Chinese planners knew they had a limited window before American carriers arrived and complicated everything. But here's the new assessment. Those carriers now have to transit through waters where China has positioned hypersonic anti-ship missiles with 900-mile range. The carriers either stay outside missile range and contribute little to the fight, or they move into range and risk being sunk. China just created a scenario where American carriers might not be able to effectively support Taiwan even if they're deployed. The timeline implications are obvious. China doesn't need to wait until they can guarantee invasion success. They just need to wait until American carriers can be neutralized or delayed long enough that Taiwan can't hold out. The Spratly missile bases give China that capability. Intelligence assessments previously estimated China wouldn't be ready to invade until 2027 or 2028. The new missile installations suggest they might feel ready by late 2025 or early 2026. The Pentagon has 3 options for responding to the new Chinese missile installations. All of them carry enormous risks. None of them guarantee success. Option 1 is to destroy the installations before they become fully operational. Launch cruise missile strikes from submarines and destroyers, hit the radar facilities, missile launchers, and underground bunkers before China can fully integrate them into their defense network. This would work militarily, but it requires starting a war with China. Nobody is recommending this option publicly. Option 2 is to deploy countermeasures. Position more submarines in the South China Sea to threaten Chinese installations. Deploy land-based missiles to the Philippines or Taiwan that can strike the artificial islands. Increase patrols and surveillance to monitor Chinese activities. This is the likely response, but it's reactive rather than proactive. China has the initiative. Option 3 is to accept the new reality and adjust strategy. Acknowledge that the South China Sea is now contested water where U.S. carriers can't operate safely. Focus on defending the first island chain from Japan through Taiwan to the Philippines using air bases and smaller surface ships. But here's the problem with all 3 options. They're playing catch-up to Chinese moves that were planned and executed faster than U.S. intelligence detected. China is dictating the pace, and the U.S. is responding. That's not a position of strength. The South China Sea isn't just strategically important. It's economically critical. $5 trillion in trade passes through these waters annually. 1/3 of global shipping transits the area. Undersea cables carrying internet traffic for half the planet run along the sea floor. China just positioned military forces to potentially control or disrupt all of it. Here's the leverage this creates. In a crisis, China could declare the South China Sea a military exclusion zone. No commercial shipping without Chinese approval, no transit without escort. Trade routes that currently operate freely become subject to Chinese control. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Southeast Asian nations would face economic strangulation. But here's the worst scenario. China doesn't need to actually close the sea lanes. They just need the threat to exist. Insurance rates for ships transiting the area would skyrocket. Shipping companies would route around the South China Sea even if China never fires a shot. The economic disruption would be massive, and China would achieve strategic control without military conflict. The Philippines are particularly vulnerable. 90% of Philippine imports arrive by sea through routes that pass within range of Chinese missile installations. In a conflict, the Philippines could be blockaded without Chinese ships ever leaving port. Just the threat of missiles is enough to strangle an economy that depends on maritime trade. The satellite images from January 2025 show installations that are already operational. This isn't a future threat. This is current reality. China has positioned hypersonic anti-ship missiles, advanced radar systems, and hardened military facilities on artificial islands in the middle of the South China Sea. The strategic balance in the Western Pacific just shifted. The immediate question is what China does next. Do they continue building out these installations with more missiles and aircraft? Do they expand to other islands in the Spratlys or Paracelsus? Do they use this new capability to pressure neighboring countries or test U.S. resolve? All three are likely. The medium-term question is how the U.S. responds. Does the Pentagon adjust carrier deployment patterns to account for the new threat? Do they accelerate deployment of hypersonic weapons and long-range missiles to offset Chinese advantages? Do they strengthen alliances with Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines to present a united front? Some combination of all three is probable. But here's the ultimate question. Does this move China closer to invading Taiwan or further from it? The optimistic view is that China is building these installations defensively to deter U.S. intervention, not offensively to enable invasion. The pessimistic view is that China is systematically removing obstacles to invasion, and the Spratly missiles eliminate the carrier threat. The satellite images don't answer that question. They just show that China is moving faster than anyone expected and building capabilities that directly threaten American military power in Asia. What looked like a stable standoff 6 months ago now looks like China preparing the battlefield for a conflict they believe is inevitable. 3 artificial islands, underground bunkers, hypersonic missiles, radar networks, all built in 3 months. All positioned to control the South China Sea and threaten Taiwan. The images are public, the threat is real, and the timeline for whatever comes next just got a lot shorter than anyone wanted to believe.